I have been doing genealogy for 28 years now. Some of you in the audience probably have been doing it longer than I have. But I remember the days of when we didn't have everything online, where you had to go to the archives, you had to go to the libraries and museums and historical societies and all of these places to try to find these records. 8 years ago, I became an archivist. And when I became an archivist, it was interesting to be on the other side. I didn't think it would be that different, but it was. I get to work with genealogists every single day. Those are my people. And so I love seeing them walk in the door. But I've learned that there's some education that needs to be done about records that are in our repositories. Everything is not online. There's a lot coming online. There's a lot online. And I sit up till 3 o'clock in the morning in my fuzzy slippers too, and I research. But we've got to push away from the computer. We've got to either call or email or visit these places because that's where the gold is. They're in our archives. So today we're going to talk about It's Not All Online, researching in archives. And it's kind of in 2 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about archives, different kinds of archives. The second part, I'm going to talk about some record sources that I believe genealogists don't tap into because they're mainly not online. Or a lot of times they're not microfilmed either, but they're in our facilities. And then I'm going to talk just a little bit about records online or archives online because they're online too. So I hope you enjoy it. I don't mind asking or answering questions during the presentation, but if you'd like to wait till the end, that's fine. But don't be afraid to ask a question. The only question that's dumb is the one you don't ask. I ask tons of questions. And so that's how we learn, and I'm a lifelong learner. I believe if you're not learning, you're not living. So write down your questions, and I will be glad to answer them all. So let's get started with what is an archive. Some of you may be thinking, okay, Melissa, I know what an archive is. This is kind of elementary, but we're going to talk about archives because even me, myself, I kind of get in a rut or I kind of get blinders on and I don't look outside the box or I don't look in the area where I'm researching at the different kinds of archives, where the records actually are. They may not be in the typical archives that you're thinking they would be. The Society of American Archivists defines an archive as an organization that collects the records of individuals, families, and other organizations. Now that's a pretty broad definition of an archive. That should be your clue that our archives hold tremendous amounts of records of all kinds. They came from everywhere and from everyone. And so when you really start thinking about it, it's a lot bigger than what we think as we're doing our research. Archives are everywhere. There are so many different kinds of archives. They may not even have the word archive in their title or on their building, but they may be an archive. So we're going to first talk about county archives. That's where I work. I work in the county archives. This is our little sign on our door. We are in the basement of the Houston County Courthouse. That's where they put all county archives, are in basements. I don't know why, but they do. Yes. Well, and we even have an added feature. We have the women's bathroom right above us. So that's an added feature that we get to deal with. Knock on wood, we haven't had any problems. So hopefully in the next year, we're going to be moving our archives. The county has actually given us the old jail. It's the next street over from the courthouse. And the jail cells are still intact. The building was built in the 1940s. So it's historical. But there's a lot more room. And there's not a bathroom over our heads. So county archives. County archives, whether you know it or not, their main job is to manage county government records. Now these are not necessarily the historical and genealogical records that county governments produce that we see as genealogical in nature. These are the working records that they produce every single day. That's the county archives' main job. When I say manage, all the departments in our county, when they get full in their offices, they contact us and say, okay, we're ready to transfer 1,000 boxes, not 1,000 boxes, but feels like it sometimes. ready to transfer our older records to you because they've run out of room. And that's another purpose of an archive, is to relieve that from a county archive, so that, or county department, so they can add more records as they're produced. So that's our main job. County archives can also collect and preserve local historical records. Now in parentheses I put, but not always, because it depends on the county archive and what they decide to do. I know that Dixon County Archives does not do a lot of this collecting of historical and genealogical records. I have chosen in my archives to do this because there's no place else in my county that collects and preserves historical and genealogical records. And I'm a genealogist. That's really a problem being an archivist when you're a genealogist, because I want to save everything. My friend over at the Metro Nashville Archives, Ken Feith, calls himself an archivist hoarder. And so I kind of am like that myself. I can't say no when people walk in. Do you want this? Oh, yes, thank you. So remember, not all archives, county archives, collect the historical and genealogical records that we're after. So when you're talking with them or visiting with them, don't be disappointed when they tell you we don't have scrapbooks, we don't have diaries, we have the county government records. So it's always important to talk to them and find out just what they have. County archives are also funded by the local government, or they could be funded by contributions and donations. Our sister county, we call them, Stewart County, Tennessee, they are not funded by their local government. They operate from donations. Jim Long, who is with that archives, he produces books that they sell to generate revenue. They have a team of volunteers. They're only open on Tuesdays. And so that's another important thing to remember. All archives are different, even when it comes to their hours they're open, days they're open, what records they have, how they're funded, and all that comes into play on how records are processed, how they're available to researchers. So it's always a good idea to do your homework when you're starting to research at a new place. Let's say, years ago, I was researching a murder that my husband's ancestor did in 1890. He shot and killed someone on New Year's Eve. He was drunk, killed someone in Baltimore, Maryland. I've never done any research in Baltimore, Maryland. And when I got to looking, I just wanted court records. That's all I wanted was court records. And I started doing the research, and I found out that there's a Baltimore, Maryland, and there's a Baltimore City, Maryland. And records could be either place. So it's always a good idea to do your research on the area you're fixing to do research in before you actually do the research. It will save you some time and headaches when you're trying to find the records. Do not confuse county archives with other local archives. I get all the time, oh, you're with the Historical Society. And while our Historical Society is absolutely wonderful, they don't have any records. They're a group of people that meet once a month, and they do some volunteer things in the community historically. They don't have any records. And I don't mind, because I'm a member of the Historical Society. I'm on the board of directors. But our county archives is not the Historical Society. So it's always important that when you're doing research to know what group you're working with, what entity. Is it a county archive, a historical society, a museum, whatever it is. Because that way you will understand the records that they have, where they're located, and so if you have to go back to them, you'll know that. Another type of archive could be a historical or genealogical society. Mr. Bennett, I see you perked up just a little bit. Some historical or genealogical societies have buildings with records. Just like I said, mine does not, but many do. And in many areas, they combine them via historical and genealogical society. And some have historical societies and genealogical societies. But they could have records as well. Mr. Bennett is looking at this photograph because his ancestor is probably in it. Which one is it?
He's second in in the back row, second from the left, the dark suit.
He's not looking at the camera.
Well, we're not photogenic.
Yes, this is actually county officials from Houston County from the 1880s. See there, I brought the archives to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Historical and Genealogical Societies also collects and preserve historical records. Just like a county archive, if they collect these types of records, many times people walk in and they'll say, hey, I have this, do you want it? So talk to the local historical and genealogical society in the area where you're researching. I don't know if y'all would like for me to explain. I put lots of documents and scans in my presentations because I don't want to just tell you that the records are there, I want to show you the records. This is actually from my husband's family, Mr. Jesse Glasgow. It's my husband's third great-grandfather. This is from the Stewart County Archives. And so they're there. These records are in the archives. Historical and Genealogical Society members can be very knowledgeable about their local history and about the records that they have. Now, not all of them are. Not all of them. I can't retain everything either. But you'd be surprised what they know, especially if the members have been lifelong residents of the area. You could tell them a surname, and 3 hours later, they're still talking to you. So, but that is a treasure because they have that information. I hope they get it down on some sort of paper or recording because then it's lost. But they are wonderful people to talk to about things too that may not even be in the records, about small communities that no longer exist, about schools that no longer exist. And so talk to them at the Historical and Genealogical Society. Local public libraries. I absolutely love local public libraries. I love books. Do not come into my office because I have piles of books that I need to read. This is actually, I clipped this from their website. This is the Harvey Brown Genealogy Room in Montgomery County. I've spent many, many hours in that genealogy room doing research. They have a wonderful genealogy section in their library. Many of our local public libraries have genealogy rooms in them. So don't discount libraries. Even if they kind of seem like they may not have anything, they may have something for you. They could have what are called special collection sections. This is actually a term that many libraries use to describe things like manuscript collections, vertical files, items that have been donated to them by individuals, correspondence, scrapbooks, things like that. Now you're probably wondering, well, why is that at the library if you have an archives? Because sometimes, like I told you, the county archives may not accept those kinds of things. Historical Society may not have a place to put them, and so they're at the library. Reference materials that are genealogy related. Miss Virginia and I were talking earlier about some books from Kentucky, and many of our wonderful libraries have local reference books. And sometimes these books are either self-published or locally published and not available online. You can't go on Amazon and find them. They're kind of just like there. They're local authors or they've just been published there locally. And so check these local libraries for things like that. I'll tell you a funny story about local libraries. As I said, I've been doing genealogy research for 28 years. Started taking clients in 2004. And my daughter, I would drag her to the libraries everywhere I'd go. And she got to where she hated going with me. Literally despised. Mom, what are we doing today? Going to the library, oh, she would just melt. My daughter's assistant librarian at our local library. So something stuck. So now let's talk about state archives. I like to call these mega archives because they are literally awesome. This is one of my favorite photographs of the TSLA. It's from about 1953. Don't you love the old cars? It's about around the time I think it was first built. I call this my home archives, even though I work in one, because I've researched here for many years, and I also came here to learn how to be an archivist through the Archives Institute. So it has a very special place in my heart. I will tell you something about this building that I learned during the Archives Institute. The last day of my last year before I graduated, they asked us if we would like to have a tour of the top floor. And we were all like, well, yeah, you know. And so they put us on an elevator, went up to the top floor. When the elevator opened, we all stepped out of the elevator, and then we all stopped in our tracks. Because what's on the floors, is it still the same? Okay. Are the Tennessee Supreme Court records that they have been working on for years and will be working on for years. But those of us that were new archivists walked out of that elevator, and as far as we could see, any which way we looked, it was nothing but shelves and boxes. And we had just worked on some of the Tennessee Supreme Court records in our class. So I will never, ever forget that experience. But state archives, I can consider them mega archives because they literally hold so much. They hold the state government records. Now, to you as a genealogist, they may not mean anything to you, but I guarantee you, if you got into these records, you would find some interesting things and possibly some things about your ancestor, or maybe even things about where your ancestors lived in Tennessee. It's not just, you know, passing laws, passing bills. It also included a lot of the local citizens in other counties that came to the state government. So if you've never done research in the government records, I would encourage you to kind of, you know, dip your toe in and kind of look around and see what you see, and you might be surprised. They also could have county government records. And now here they have a lot of those on microfilm, but I'm talking about actual county records. And the reason why they may have them here is because the county may not have an archive. The county may not have the funds or the place to put these records, and so they've been transferred to the state archives. So if you're working in a particular county researching, and you keep getting the answer, we don't have that, I don't know where that is, that kind of thing, talk to the state archives. Possibly they were moved there. Now they may be sitting in a closet or a building somewhere that nobody knows about anymore, but maybe they were taken to the state archives. State Archives also collects historical, genealogical records and artifacts. I love to come here and see their displays in the main hall, their exhibits. I don't know if it's the same one. I didn't look today. It was on medicine last time I was here last month. Is it still medicine? Does anybody remember? Oh, yeah, good. And I read everything. I read every board, looked at every picture because it fascinated me. If you get the chance to visit the state archives where your ancestors were from, I would highly encourage it, if you're able to travel and to do that. This is also where records conservation takes place. Miss Carol Roberts, who is a conservationist here, does a fantastic job, her and her team. The county archives sometimes will reach out to them to help them with records that have been damaged, especially if we've had a flood or other kind of tragedy. But also if we've run across something that we can't handle in our own archives, we'll reach out to them. I always encourage genealogists, if they have records or something in their own collections that is damaged, falling apart, or having issues, to contact the state archives and talk to their conservationists. Not all of them help private citizens, but they can direct you to someone who can help you. They are a fantastic resource. Next, let's talk about university and college libraries and archives. These are ones that I find that genealogists don't think about on a regular basis. And there are a lot of them, and they have some fantastic records just waiting for you to find. This is actually the campus of Murray State University in Kentucky. I saw a thumbs up there. And I had an epiphany, I guess you'd say, at this university several years ago, which I'm going to talk about. They could house local historical records and artifacts. They also hold their college records and student records, first and foremost. But why would they have historical and genealogical records? Well, because they're part of the community. They are an archive. Let's say the community doesn't have a county archive. Maybe they don't have the genealogical historical societies that take records. And they are all about education and maybe concerned about the history of our state, of their community. So a lot of them do house historical and genealogical records in their archives and libraries. They are located on the campus themselves. I've never had trouble gaining access to libraries and archives on a campus at a college. I don't know if anyone else has had trouble. I haven't. They're usually pretty open and want you to come. And they could have more than one library, more than one archives, and usually they're named after someone because they donated money. This is actually a photograph inside the Pogue Library. The Pogue Library is where I had my epiphany several years ago. I had to go look for some Kentucky obituaries, and I found out that they had them at the Pogue Library on microfilm. So my husband and I made a day trip of it because it's only about an hour and a half, 2 hours from where I live. And it's a beautiful, beautiful library. And the student who was working the desk I went in there. I was the only one in there, which was wonderful. She sat me down at a microfilm machine, and I thought I was in heaven. It was one of those new microfilm machines that you didn't have to crank, that was hooked up to a computer, that you could put the information on a thumb drive or email it to yourself. I just had never seen anything like it. They were brand new. And so that was my first epiphany at this library. So I looked at my obituaries and got finished. And then I started to look around the room. And being the nosy genealogist that I am, I noticed that half of the room, you don't see it in this picture, but the other half of the room is lined with filing cabinets. And I thought, what are in those filing cabinets? So I got up and I went over and I pulled one of the filing cabinet drawers open, and there was file folders in there. I started looking in the file folders, and there was newspaper clippings and all kinds of different documents and things. And I thought, what is that? So I went and got the student clerk. I said, what is this? And she introduced me to vertical files. And we're going to talk about vertical files a little bit later. So Pogue Library has another special place in my heart. Colleges and university library and archives receives donations of historical and genealogical records. This happens mainly from alumni. Have you ever heard a report of a famous person, an actor, actress, or a publisher, or maybe even a senator, congressman, and they say that they've donated their papers to their old college? That happens. But us that are not famous went to college, and our papers could be donated to our college where we went to school. And so if your ancestors went to college, check for that. If they didn't go to college, I still suggest you look at these colleges and universities in the area where your ancestors lived, because they could very well be holding records that you need for your genealogy research. It's just another fantastic resource. How about museums? Have you ever thought about museums as archives? They can be. I actually know someone who found their ancestor on display. There was a picture of their ancestor. They were walking through a museum, and there they were. Well, where do you think all of these things go when they're not on display, when they change out their displays or exhibits? They go into back rooms. This is actually one of our display cases in the archives. This is our military display that we did. I like to say that museums have a front room and a back room. The front room is where you walk through and you ooh and you awe over all the exhibits and displays. But they also have a back room that have shelves with records, artifacts, and things like that. This is the Williamson County Museum and Archives. I absolutely love this place. I want to live there. If you've ever been there, I just want to live there. The picture at the top is one of their displays that they have on the floor. And then this is not a picture of their back room. I did not get a picture of the back room, but this is an example of what it could look like. I would encourage everyone to go there because their museum section is wonderful. They even have a totally separate section for militaria. It's just wonderful. That's what I want to build in Houston County one day. But they have records in their back rooms. I've talked to the archivist. She's a friend of mine, and they're just an archivist as well. And so check with museums in the area where you're researching. Museums may not always let you research in their archives. They're pretty particular, and they're pretty, I don't know, they kind of, all archivists are the same way. We're very protective over our records. But don't overlook them, and it never hurts to ask. They can say no, but you can still ask. And if you ask about certain types of records or certain surnames, it may stick in their head, and then they may do a display or exhibit on those records, and then you can come and see them. I'm just trying to show you that records can literally be anywhere. They could contain archived records in back rooms. We talked about that. This is another type of archive, a church archive. This is actually this is the historical foundation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church and the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in America. My good friend and her family is actually from Houston County. Susan Knight Gore, the Knight family is from Houston County, is the archivist there. This archives is actually in Cordova, Tennessee, just outside of Memphis. And when I first got to know Susan and her archives, I thought, oh, well, that's wonderful. She's archiving the local church records from that particular denomination. What I got to find out was, from her Facebook page, because I'm on Facebook with her, is that she and her husband get in their van and they drive to all different states, and they pick up records from these churches and bring them back to the archives. I thought she was just the local there. But no, the denomination, they go and get those records when the church calls and say, we have records for you. They go and get them and bring them back to their archives. So learning these things, studying these places where the records are, will help you to understand what they have. Remember, the church archives are usually separated by denomination or type of religion. There are Catholic archives, so things like that. They archive the records from the local church in one facility, like Susan's archives does. The individual churches could still have records there at their parish. Sometimes they're not as organized or archived, but you can also, one instance I got very excited about was years ago. My ancestors lived in Ohio, and they lived in the same county, Wyandotte County, Ohio, since the day they got off the boat, I think, forever, which was great for me because all of their records was in one place. I contacted the local church that they were a part of and got a hold of the secretary there. Told her I was doing research, I was looking for anything on the family. Not only did she send me a huge packet of information because my ancestor had helped build the church, she sent me pictures of the pulpit because he had built the pulpit, but she was also a descendant. So she was very eager to help. So church records are fantastic. Maybe the church leader or the Sunday school teacher took the records home. The reason I say that is because recently we received a donation of records from a local family, and in those records were Sunday school attendance books because she had been a Sunday school teacher. And they're a fantastic resource. They list everyone that was in the Sunday school class. These are from the 1920s. They list who transferred from what church. And so dates. You just don't know where you're going to find the records. It surprises me every day when someone walks into my archives and says, here, do you want this? And when I look at it, I think, why do you have that? One of the things about our archives that we are hoping one day to find is we do have some record loss. It's not from the Civil War. It's not because we weren't a county yet, and it's not from a fire or a tornado or anything like that. It's from mankind. When our courthouse our new courthouse that we have now was being built in 1956, they tore down the old courthouse first. It was one of those roundabout courthouses you could drive around, and they didn't want that anymore. They wanted a straight thoroughfare. So they had to tear down the old courthouse first. They took all the records out and stored it in the high school gym. And theory is that some county officials took records home with the understanding they were to come back when the courthouse was finished. Courthouse was finished, records were brought back. We are missing records from 1871 to 1956 for the loose court records. Now we're going to talk about loose court records here in a little bit, so you'll know what those are. The bound volumes of court records are intact, but the loose working papers are missing. We don't have near as much as what we should. And so I keep hoping someone's going to open up an old barn, get up in an old attic, and find them. One day, the local citizen who is Mr. Webb Mitchum, he's born and raised there, he's 90-something years old. He owns the drugstore. They've owned it there forever. He comes in and hands me a few documents. And I say, okay, great. Well, he leaves, and I start looking at them. And one of them is a circuit court case packet from 1920. So then I think, okay, how can I get in your house? Because I'm thinking, why does he have this court case packet? So, but that's how things happen. And that's how a lot of our archives get their records. People just bring them in. The Southern Baptist Historical Library and Archives is in downtown Nashville. I've researched there many times. Is Taffy Hall still there? Okay, Taffy Hall. She has helped me many times. And it's a fantastic archive. I have found things there that were not just based in Nashville. So don't think that these archives, especially the church archives, are just Tennessee records or just that county records. When it comes to churches, they tend to collect from all of their churches wherever they may be because they're Southern Baptist or they're Presbyterian. Regional archives. I know you're thinking, okay, we've got it. We know what archives is. But I really want you to really start thinking about there's just so much out there. Regional archives are archives that contain records for a certain region. And who knew there were these kind of archives? They highlight a particular culture in the region. And they can encompass more than one state within that region. This is a fantastic example. This is the Archives of the Appalachia. This is the East Tennessee State University. It encompasses more than one state. And so these are fantastic archives to check into as well. How about ethnic archives? That's another avenue to check into. They collect and archive records for a particular race of people. They concentrate on history, culture, and lives of a particular ethnic group. They're learning centers for diverse groups of people that are found in our lineage. I mean, there's Jewish archives, there's Irish archives. There is the Museum of the Cherokee Indian in Cherokee, North Carolina. There is the brand new National Museum of African American History and Culture. I have not been here yet. I want to go. But these are archives as well. I know that this, Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I know that this particular museum, actually they're called the National Museum, they are collecting histories and documents and photographs and oral histories and everything that they can. I'm very, very excited about this particular archive. So that's about archives. And just remember, archives can be anywhere, records can be anywhere. I did not necessarily realize this until I became an archivist. And this is a great example. This is actually Miss Nina Finley, who was our local county historian. She passed away about 3 years ago. She was a fantastic local historian. She's one of those people, like I said, you give her a surname, 3 hours later, she's still talking. 2 weeks before she passed away, I told her, I said, Miss Nina, you have got to write down what is in your head, or else we're going to lose it. Oh, and if you knew her, oh, no, she's real gruff. And I said, well, at least sit down with a recorder and get it out. When she passed, we lost a lot of our history, our local history, because she did a lot of she wrote books, and she talked a lot, and she helped a lot, but she didn't get it all out of her head. Not long after she passed away, her son called me, and she says, I'm cleaning out Mom's house. There's some things in her attic. Would you like to have them? Sure. 2 truckloads later, this is what we get. So this is what I call fresh from the attic. It has everything. She came to this building, I don't know how many times, doing research on Houston County. Because this was back before we had an archives, back before we had our records in order. But she would come to this building and literally sit on those microfilm machines, sit at the table reading books for years. So these records were in her attic. Well, think about, that's when people say, well, I'm done with my genealogy because I just can't find anything else. There's nothing else out there. I found everything. Let me tell you something. There's still attics. There's still basements. There's still abandoned buildings, things that have records in them. Every day almost, I hear of this was found over here in this. Even in the archives, we find things that we didn't know we had sometimes. That happens. So don't give up. Think that it's all done. I put this in, it's kind of funny, at a local antique store. This isn't an antique store story, but my husband and I were driving through Dover, Tennessee, which is in Stewart County, and he's a big tech guy, and he's a ham radio operator and things, and he wanted something. There's actually a local Radio Shack still there. Now, well, there's no Radio Shacks, I don't think, anywhere anymore, but there's one in Dover. So we stopped there, and we went in, and it was a little unusual. I noticed that there were some display cases with old documents in them. And I thought, what are these doing here? And so I got to talking to the owner, and I told him I was an archivist and talking to him, and he said, wait just a minute. He left and he came back and he brought this book down. And he said, here, look at this. When I opened it, it was a mercantile store ledger book that had people's accounts listed in it from the 1800s. And I said, oh, what are you going to do with that? He said, I'm going to keep it. He still has it. I even told him, I said, well, you need to talk to Jim Long and donate it to the Stewart County Archives. And he says, no, I think I'll keep it. Okay. So you just don't know where you're going to find records. Online auction sites. I do this all the time. I'll go to an online auction site and I'll search for my surnames. I have found documents. I have found photographs. I do it for the archives. Now, I'm not exactly sure how kosher this is, but it works. I have on eBay, you can set up where it'll search for you and send you emails if they find anything. And I do that for the archives on different cities in our county and in the city. And when I get things, I'll go there, and we don't have funding to purchase items. We have a very small budget. So I will email or send a message to the seller, and I'll say, I know you're trying to make money on this item, I understand that. And I said, but if it doesn't sell, would you please donate it to the archives? We're trying to reclaim as much as we can of our history because we've lost so much. I have gotten a lot of stuff that way. And they just mail it to me. This one guy was a stamp collector, and he got boxes and boxes of these envelopes. I don't understand stamp collectors. I'm not a stamp collector. He bought boxes of envelopes, I guess for the stamps. They're empty envelopes. And as he was going through them, he was posting the envelopes of the ones he didn't want anymore. Well, there was this Miss Mary Carpenter envelope from Houston County. It was postmarked Houston County, 1885, I think. So I contacted him, told him my little spiel, and he sent it to me. He put another one up for Miss Mary Carpenter, did the same thing, and he sent it to me. I did that 3 times, and he sent it to me. After that, he just started sending them to me. So I have 9 of those envelopes now. They're all empty, but they have her name, and they have our postmark from Houston County here in Tennessee. So it does work. Miss Susan Knight Gore that I talked to you about that is the archivist in Cordova, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. She does the same thing, but she does it. She finds things for Houston County, she buys them, and then she sends them to us. She doesn't even tell me. They just show up in the mail. Last thing she sent to me were 2 old newspapers from the 1800s, original newspapers that haven't even been microfilmed at TSLA. So we have wonderful patrons that help us out. Personal papers. This is what I was talking about, where the records are. Your genealogy research, the records you have in your home, those are personal papers. And everybody has them. And usually when they pass, or maybe before they pass, they get donated to archives. So you just don't know. So where do you start? We're going to start locally. We need to start locally. Try to bring that big picture down to something smaller bites. I'm showing you this particular map because this is from the Archives Development page on the TSLA website. It shows which counties have a county archive. That's the ones in blue. It shows you which county has a partial or inactive archive. Those are the counties in green. And what that means is like Humphreys County, they're considered partial or inactive because they don't have an archivist right now. The white counties are the ones that do not have an archive. Now, I talked to the lady that they're trying to get one in Tipton County. I talked to her. She was asking me some advice to talk to her commissioners. How should she say it? What should she say? So, but I will tell you, the Tennessee State Library and Archives has worked very, very hard to try to get an archive in every county in Tennessee. Not all states do that. Locate and document every place where there are records being archived in the area that you're researching. That is what I do. When I told you about I was going to start researching in Baltimore, Maryland, before I even started researching in the records, I did a blanket search of all the different archives or where I think the records would be located in that area. Just for my own information, so that as I researched, I didn't have to stop and do that. I already had that information. Spend some time talking to the local historian, archivist, librarian, or anyone else that oversees records in the community. And I will also add, talk to the Chamber of Commerce. And then my last ditch effort is to find out who's the oldest people in the community. Get contact information. Contact them and pick their brains. Just like Miss Nina Finley, our county historian. She knew everybody and knew where everything was. If you're having a hard time finding records, the records that you think you should be able to find, talk to these older people in the community and say, okay, where are the records? They probably know where they're at. So that's kind of my last ditch effort. Locate and bookmark any websites for these local archives. I do that right along when I'm doing my initial search for these places. A lot of them have websites, so bookmark them, note them so that you have them, and if you need to go back, you don't have to go searching for them again. And then I talk about going to the next level. Once you've canvassed that local area, you may need to go a little bit higher. When all local archives have been searched and explored, it's time to go to the next level, and those are state archives. I think our state archives are really underutilized. All 50 U.S. states have a state archive. Did you know that? Every state has a state archives. All 50 states has a website. All their archives have a website, every one of them. And many of them have some fantastic websites. State archives may not be able to help you locate smaller archives in the community. Even though you've blanketed that local community, if you talk to the state archives, they may tell you, hey, did you check this place? Or hey, did you check over here? Okay? And this is, of course, where records preservation and conservation is handled at the state level. So let's talk about researching in the records. These records I'm going to talk about I'm going to say it's my personal opinion, are the ones that genealogists don't access enough. This has been from the last 8 years working with genealogists and not necessarily being one. I researched these records as a genealogist, maybe because there wasn't so much online at the time. But since I've been working with genealogists through and being an archivist, I find that a lot of genealogists either don't know about these record sources, don't know they exist, or not sure how to research in them. So manuscript collections. I think these are the number one underutilized record source in genealogy. That's my opinion. See, I put my opinion up there. And the reason I say that is because when genealogists come into my archives and I say, well, let's look in the manuscript collections. Let's look in the what? So I get to stop and I get to say, okay, let me tell you about manuscript collections. These are fantastic. This is how I describe to people what a manuscript collection is. In your mind, at your home, collect everything that you have collected genealogy-wise. All of your original documents, your photographs, your family group sheets, your artifacts, anything and everything, scrapbooks, diaries, whatever you consider genealogy, put them in boxes in your mind, put those boxes in your car, and then drive them down to the archives and drop them off. That's a manuscript collection. So when you think of it that way, and you think about people donating that kind of stuff to archives, what can be in them is pretty much limitless. And they could have your ancestors in them. This is actually we have an Irish celebration every year in Houston County, and this is our Irish celebration collection, manuscript collection. They are truly a goldmine of genealogical and historical records that our ancestors and their neighbors, I meant to put and, could have generated. If you're not researching neighbors, you may have heard about the fan club. Okay. Friends, associates, and neighbors. I'm a huge proponent of that because it worked for me, and so then I got sold on it. My husband, I was looking for a death date and place for his great-great-aunt, Sarah Elizabeth Barker Moran. Last time I found her was in Fulton County, Kentucky, and then she disappeared. I could not find her. I just went a few years, and I said, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet. I researched all of her children. She had 7 children, 5 males, 2 females. And all of her male children married no less than 5 times each. Congratulations. I know. And I wish I had known ahead of time to research the last male child, but I started at the top. I researched every wife. I got every divorce paper, everything. When I got to the last male child, the last wife, I connected with the living human being that had a trunk full of records that belonged to the Barker family. Why this wife, who they had no children, and he divorced, carried this trunk with that family for over 100 years. He had a picture of Sarah Elizabeth Barker in it. He had her death certificate in it. He had other documents in it, but he would not give me the trunk. It didn't even belong to his family. It was a Barker's. He was a different name. She had gone on to marry someone else, and that's where he descended from. But this trunk stayed in the family. So yes, I did that. And one interesting thing that came out of all of it was that when I read all of those divorce papers, 25 of them, because it's 5 marriages, right? Is that 25? 5 times? Yeah, 5, yeah, 25. Because there were so many, I lost count. In every divorce paper, the son's mother, Sarah Elizabeth Barker, took the side of the wife. I thought, wow, something really must be wrong with her children. So that is my story of researching everyone connected in the family. I research everyone. I research cousins, I research aunts, uncles, I research spouses that married in, because you just don't know who's going to have the records. Where did the family Bible go? I have records, those delayed birth records that say the evidence is a family Bible. Where is it? Who knows who has it? Manuscript collections are located behind closed doors. This is another reason why genealogists, I don't think about them. When you walk into a research area, it's a nice pretty area with tables and chairs, maybe a few shelves with some books on it, but where the gold is behind the doors in the stacks. The finding aid is what I call the roadmap to the collection. These will usually be indexed. Ask the archivist for the index of the finding aid. It could be indexed on an in-house computer at the archives. And you were asked the question about surnames. Collections are usually titled by what they are. And when I say that, it could be like this one, the Marie Stockard Manuscript Collection. Well, there's a name. It could be the Smith Papers. It could be the Rotary Club Organization Collection. Okay? So when you're looking at the finding aids, there's going to be a lot of great information on there, but you want to make your way down to what's called the contents list or the box list. That's going to give you a box by box, folder by folder listing of what's in the collection. Now this is an example from the finding aid that I did for the Marie Stockard collection. And folder 7 says Correspondence, Letters to Parents from Talmadge, dated May 25th, 1925. Now I'm going to warn you. A lot of the finding aids you're going to look at is not going to be this detailed. The reason being is because most archivists don't have the time to detail it that much. I have a luxury that I work in a small archives and I can take the time, and I'm also cursed with being a genealogist. And I know that our genealogists are looking at me going, well, couldn't you have told me what this was? Because many times what you're going to see is you're going to see Correspondence 1925. is about all you're going to see in the finding aid. So if it matches your time frame, I would pull it. And I'd ask the archivist or fill out the form that says, please bring me this file. It takes you just a few minutes to look through the file. And then you can decide, okay, there's nothing here. But if you didn't look in there, what could you have missed? Just kind of go the extra mile. What could be in manuscript collections? Diaries, letters, family genealogies, personal papers, business records, school records, original documents, and on and on and on. I have seen so much in manuscript collections. That's my favorite. Vertical files. We talked about vertical files and how I discovered them. They are a collection of miscellaneous documents. It's kind of like Forrest Gump. It's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. Vertical files are absolutely fantastic. They are stored in file folders and then in filing cabinets. Like at the Pogue Library, they were out in the open at that time. They may be behind closed doors now after I pilfered through them. So we need to put these behind closed doors. People are looking at them. But we'll have an index. The index will have surname or subject name. And so you can look for your surnames. When I say subject name, it could be Tom Jones's Mercantile Store. Maybe all they have is one letterhead, and it's in the file. And so surnames, it could be anything in that file, whatever's been donated. In my case, as I'm going through records that we've had since 1871, some of these boxes of stuff, as I say, it kind of looks like, when we have elections and the elected officials go out of office and the new one comes in, they just took their desk and went into a box. And that's what I've got to deal with. And so going through that, we find a piece of something here, a piece of something there, and we'll put it in a vertical file. They are a hodgepodge of records that may not be in any other collection. There also could be original records in there. I have some original military records in some of our vertical files. I have some original burial association records. And I don't mean like boxes, I mean like one or two. Newspaper clippings are a favorite to put in vertical files. And these vertical files could also go by another name. It could be subject files. I've also seen them referred to as morgue files, M-O-R-G-U-E, morgue. Family histories are in these files. I encourage genealogists to write up your family history, donate it to the local archive of whatever is in the area where your ancestors lived. Make sure your contact information is on there. Because when other genealogists come along and look at this particular piece of information and find your family history or your family group sheet, and they see there's a contact name, or if they contact you and they say, I have a trunk of records. So that's always a good idea. Copies of family Bible pages. I'm not exactly sure why a lot of vertical files have these, but they do. Here at the TSLA, they have a fantastic project of family Bibles that they're doing here. But when you're working with an archive of any kind, ask them about if they have vertical files. So let's talk about diaries and journals. How many of you have diaries and journals in your family collections? Don't you just love them? It's like reading, Time Machine or something. They are a fantastic source to locate genealogical and historical information. They will be found in manuscript collections. We just talked about manuscript collections, so you kind of know what those are now. They will be found in manuscript collections. They're almost always donated to archives. And they could mention your ancestor. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, how in the world am I going to find out if it's mentioned my ancestor? Well, you're going to have to do some reading, because not all of them are transcribed, every name indexed. But there was one kind of famous one that was, and it was George Washington's diary. Many of you may have seen the episode with Tim McGraw of Who Do You Think You Are? It was in season 2. And they told him that they found his ancestor named in George Washington's diary because he was a neighbor of George Washington. Now, this is a little bit of an exception. I think everything that George Washington ever wrote has been indexed to the nth degree and transcribed. So it may have been a little bit easier for them to find his ancestor in that particular diary. But if you go to an archive and you access Let's say that you're looking for your ancestors and you see that there's a manuscript collection of a neighbor that you saw living next to them in the census records. I would check that out because you don't know if there's a diary in there, a scrapbook, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that they could have mentioned your ancestor. And this is especially true when you've reached to that point where you think you're not going to be able to find anything else, or you've looked everywhere, you've just exasperated about it. That's kind of what I'm talking about, the next level. This is a fantastic diary that we received recently in our archives. This is Priestley Clark, is his name. He actually had 3 diaries, and he worked for the railroad. These are his railroad work diaries. He kept a diary every day of where he was and what job he was doing on the railroad in the 1930s. And this is anywhere from McKenzie, he was down in McKenzie, Tennessee, Montgomery County, Clarksville, Tennessee. Of course, he was all over Houston County. But what he did is he also mentioned some of his fellow co-workers who worked for the railroad. Now, we've just gotten these, so I've not been able to index or do anything with them. But let's just say you know your ancestor worked for the railroad at this particular time, and you found out about these diaries. I would look at those diaries just to see if maybe he's mentioned. Correspondence, old letters and postcards. You know those old letters, those things you write and then you put it in an envelope, it's got a stamp. Those are fantastic and can give you some great information. They are a treasure trove. This is actually from the Marie Stockard collection. These are letters her sons wrote to her when they were in World War II. These are going to be in manuscript collections and could possibly be in vertical files. They are also donated to the archives. I do not have very many letters in my own genealogy research. I have about 100 letters that my father wrote to my mother when he was in Vietnam. I don't know why I don't have my mother's. I don't know where they went, because I know she wrote back. But that's it. That's all I've got. And so I'm always envious of people who say, I've got all these letters. I don't know what to do with them. I've got a lady that I teach a genealogy class once a month at our local library, and she's always telling me about her 500 letters that she doesn't know what to do with. I'm like, you can just give them to me. I'll take them. So yes, old letters. They could mention your ancestors. Back in the day, they talked about everything in these letters. It's kind of like Facebook for today. They just talked about everything, put all their feelings, talked about the neighbors. They talked about, their local government and this gossip and that gossip. So they told everything. So old correspondence is a fantastic resource. The main thing with a lot of these records is knowing the time period that you're looking at. Looking at the surnames, could they be neighbors? Do you remember them, seeing them in the census next to your, we know in the census that you can't always say that they were right next door, but they were close. If they're listed close to your ancestor, they were close. And so this is how we need to go look for these records when we feel like we've done all we can do. Loose records. These are ones that I love researching in. Majority of them are not online. There's not really a lot of them that have been microfilmed, but they are a fantastic resource. And almost every archive has them. These actually here, these ones you're seeing in that picture are absolutely fabulous. Last year, the school board, one of the ladies who's a friend of mine was retiring from the school board. And she knew about these old records that was in this closet. And the closet was the computer closet, where all their computer equipment was. And they were stored up on the top shelf. Well, if anyone knows anything about computers, it gets very hot. And it was on the top shelf, and they were destroying these records. Well, she was bound and determined that these records were coming to the archives before she retired. So she talked the superintendent of schools into transferring them to the archives. They date from about 1920 to about 1950, and this is exactly how they came. I got 16 boxes of these. Now, when I say school records, and the lady asked, was it you that asked about school records? I love school records, and we're going to talk about that. I shouldn't do this now because we're going to talk about it in a minute, so I'm going to wait. So loose records. I'll talk more about these in a minute, but loose records are phenomenal records. They're considered working papers or accompanying papers to the bound volumes. Now, many of us have researched in those bound volumes. Court records, marriage records, will books. They bring in those big books that are heavy, and you look for the information in there. That's usually not it. They're archived separate from the bound volumes. They could contain additional information not found in the bound volumes. Now you're probably wondering, what do you mean? Let's take court records, for instance. Many times in our court minute books, those big bound books, they have the court case listed. Now usually what's written in there is usually a synopsis. Sometimes, I haven't seen it very much, it's never a word for word everything that happened in the courtroom that day. So the loose records is everything else. It could be affidavits, it could be subpoenas, it could be witness statements, typed witness statements. There could be photographs in there. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. So what kind of loose records, well, I'll just put it this way, what bound volumes could have loose records associated with them? Certainly court records. When I told you we had record loss in our county, that's kind of mainly what we're missing are those loose court records. The bound volumes are intact, but the loose court records are what we're missing. Marriage records could have loose records associated with them. We have some of those. These could include items such as parent permission letters. These could include, back when we had to do it, the results of the blood test. Now in Tennessee, we have HIPAA laws. As an archivist, I cannot share that document with you, but they're there. Many times, and I have not studied this to know why, there's actually a copy of the marriage certificate in there, one of those nice, really thick pieces. So I talked to my county clerk. I said, why are these in here? He said, because we would do two. He said, we'd give one to the marriage couple, and we would keep one in case it was lost, they could come back and get it. But over time, when they didn't get, we would just collect them. And so I have those in my loose records, my loose marriage records. Deed records. Just this past week, I was working on highway department records in our county. What did I find in highway department records? Right-of-way deeds. Does anybody know what a right-of-way deed is? Right-of-way deeds are those deeds that property owners signed when the county was building a road or someone was building a road through their property and they needed so much land on either side. These were found in the highway department records. So, and they're loose records. They're just loose deeds, and there's lots of them. Manuscript collections and vertical files are also considered loose records. Scrapbooks. Anyone that knows me knows that these are absolutely my favorite records collections to do research in and to process in the archives. I love them so much that Stewart County knows this, and they got a collection of 13 scrapbooks and donated to them. And Miss Ski, her name is Ski Swatowski, called me and said, hey, we just got these scrapbooks in. And I said, okay, I'll be there tomorrow. And I did. I went down there the next day and looked through all 13 scrapbooks because I love them so much. They are usually donated to an archive. They are very unique and one of a kind because they're put together by individuals. One of my favorite ones that we have is the Evelyn Ellis scrapbooks from the 1930s. I wish I could meet Miss Evelyn Ellis. She did this when she was a teenager. She kept everything. You think you keep everything? This woman kept everything. Her scrapbook it's wonderful how she did it. She took like this, the Baby Ruth candy bar, and I'm not kidding, that Baby Ruth candy bar wrapper is this big. And she pasted in her book, and then she would journal about it. She would say, if I can read it from here, I can't read it from here. Always remember June 11th, 1938, at Beech Grove at the ice cream supper. That's what she would do. She would put the item in her scrapbook, and then she would say, remember, she put the date and what she did. And what I love about the scrapbook is that she has a Mexican cigarette in it. She took that Mexican cigarette and just pasted it in the scrapbook. A friend of hers gave it to her, and she wrote the word Mexican on the cigarette. And so, if you're not researching in scrapbooks, it's just not for the fun of it. When you're in an archive, researching in manuscript collections, because that's where these are going to be located, ask the archivist, do any of these manuscript collections have scrapbooks? If they say yes, I would highly encourage you to look at them. Because there's all kinds of different scrapbooks. There's newspaper clipping scrapbooks. There are people that just clip newspapers and put them in a scrapbook. Now think about this. Let's say you're looking for an obituary and a marriage announcement, something in the newspaper, and you're on that microfilm reel and you're doing this, and you get to the date that you need and that issue is missing. How many has that happened to you? Yeah. Well, maybe someone in the community clipped stuff out of that particular issue and put it in their scrapbook. It's something to think about. Could contain anything, I said that, and they're usually archived in the manuscript collections. I have actually seen a few archives that have taken all of their scrapbooks and put them in one collection. It's not very often done that way, because just like the lady asked me, when a collection comes in, we keep it all together, but I have seen it. Nuggets that can be found in scrapbooks. Original records. People pasted their birth certificates in scrapbooks. I have a scrapbook that has an original French franc from the 1930s in it. Just pasted it, and you can't get them out. I don't know what they used for paste back then, but they don't have it today because I get super glue and it doesn't half work. Newspaper clippings. Remember, lost newspapers. Letters, greeting cards, names and addresses on them. I have a scrapbook from a young lady who was 18 years old. She died just after she graduated from high school. I just recently got this because the stuff was given to a friend of hers and she just held on to it. Lady that works in the courthouse, it's her mother. And she had died about 8 or 9 years ago, and they're just now cleaning out her house. And so she brought it to me. But she kept a scrapbook. And you know those little Valentine things we used to give each other as children in school? She kept all of them and put them in her scrapbook with all the people's names on them. So they're very, very interesting. Family photographs. Maybe they journaled like Miss Ella Van Ellis did in their scrapbooks. And maybe your ancestor is in one of those scrapbooks. So check out scrapbooks when you're there. School records. Somebody asked me about school records earlier. So let's talk about school records. And if you have ancestors that you know that did not go to school, still look in school records. And we're going to talk about that. They are found in local archives, state archives, university archives, and genealogical historical societies. I love this photograph. This is elementary school, Erin Elementary School in the 1950s. I love these photographs from back then. It's like they must have stood on a ladder or something to take that picture. They vary widely in availability. I have found that you can't depend on them always being there. It depends on what was saved. Like the records that I just received, they were going to be thrown away. And so they were saved. They're sometimes harder to track down the location of where they're at. The school board could still have them, an archive could have them. Maybe they were given to the historical society. They could still be in a closet somewhere that nobody knows where they're at. So you may have to do a little bit of homework and digging to find them. But they will help to tell your ancestor's story. If you've never done research in school records, they can really be pretty interesting. Now those records that I received did not include a lot of student records. So when you think school records, don't think just student records. They included things such as teacher contracts, bus driver contracts. I think I have, ancestors that didn't go to school, but here's my list. Student attendance records, student grades, school board minutes. A lot of times these are in bound volumes, but if you're looking for information about your unschooled ancestor, look at those school board minutes. Maybe they donated property for the local one-room schoolhouse, and they're in the school board minutes. Maybe they were charged with chopping the wood for the local schoolhouse. All this stuff has to be approved through the local school board. I found some, I call them invoices, but they're really just slips of paper, that old Indian head notebook paper They would take and just rip off a piece and use it for an invoice. My husband's grandfather's name is Conley Stringfield. And I found one that said, please pay Conley Stringfield $3.50 for work he did on the Stewart School, 1940. That man never went to school a day in his life, but he's in the school records. So you just don't know where you're going to find them. School photographs, information about local schools, bus driver contracts. I found bus driver contracts from the 1930s. In these bus driver contracts, it gives the route of the bus. So if you're doing research in a local area, trying to understand the local area, where were the local schools, roads, things like that, that's fantastic. Now, a lot of Tennessee counties, or most or all of them, before consolidation of schools in the 1960s, 70s, all the little bitty communities within our counties had one-room schoolhouses. Houston County is a very small county. We only have a little over 8,000 people in our entire county today. We have four schools. We have 4 schools. We have 4 schools. Before consolidation, we had over 60 schools in our county because each little community had a school. And so these records that I've been able to get are going to help us document all of those little bitty schools, because some of them are really not open that long. And so school records are a fantastic resource. How about voting and election records? It's election year. We can think about voting and election records. And maybe you think, well, my ancestor never voted. They weren't interested in politics. Well, you'd be surprised. They are found in archives, or they could still be at the local election administration's office. It depends. That's half the battle, is finding out where these records are located, isn't it? Just finding out where they're at. Once we find them, we can maybe do research in them. This is an election return from 1924 from our archives. This is the City of Erin election return. And the election return, it lists the candidates, the votes that they received. But in the back, it's interesting, some of the officials, like poll workers and things like that, signed in the back. These are regular citizens that volunteered their time. So you don't know. Availability will be different, like I said, depending on where that was saved. One of the things I encourage genealogists to do is study the retention schedules of the state or the city, county where you're doing research. What is a retention schedule? Retention schedules are those rules, regulations, standards that tell archivists or governments, these records are permanent records, these records are temporary records. Permanent records you keep forever, temporary records you keep 5 years and you can destroy them. Now, for a genealogist to hear the word destroy is not something we want to hear, but not all records are genealogical, historical in nature. And we can't keep everything. We just don't have the space. But the retention schedules will help you to understand what may have been destroyed, why it was destroyed. So election records, they don't necessarily have to be kept, but I've kept ours because I'm a genealogist and I know that these will help. Types of voting and election records. The poll tax. As genealogists, we should know about the poll tax. Now, you're not going to find this particular record in the election records. You're going to find these in the tax records. But it is a type of voting record. Individuals had to pay a poll tax to be able to vote. So even if they did not own land, they will be listed in the tax records paying a poll tax. I find a lot of my ancestors in there because a lot of my ancestors didn't own land, but they voted. So don't discount tax records if you think, well, my ancestors didn't own land, I don't need to look in tax records. Voter registration lists. When you walk, and some of you that may remember, it's getting more automated now, but I can remember walking into my polling place and signing my name on a list to vote. Those lists could have been saved, and how neat would it be to find your ancestor's signature? We were just talking about that earlier, about finding your ancestor's signature on something. Election results. Now, you think, well, none of my ancestors ran for anything. Don't be so sure about that. I thought that too. And 2 instances I found records. In the newspaper, I found where my husband's grandfather ran for highway commissioner that nobody in the family ever knew, because a lot of people are gone now, so we can't ask. The other one, which is the one that really floored me, I've been researching Mr. Jesse Glasgow, my husband's third great-grandfather. Do you have those ancestors that the more you research them, the more intriguing they get? That's this one. And I use Google Books a lot. If you don't use Google Books, write it down. I didn't put it in the handout, but Google Books. Just go to Google, put in Google Books. Anything before 1923 is free of copyright. Google Books will have the entire books on there. I have found tons of information from my ancestors on Google Books. So I went to Google Books and I put in Jesse Glasgow. I found this legislative publication from 1865. And I got to looking at it, reading in it. It was from the election of 1865. And there was these 2 men in Stewart County that they each thought they had won the election. So they were suing each other, or they were fighting over it. Kind of reminds me of the hanging Chad, but you know. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, what has this got to do with Jesse Glasgow? Well, the whole process of this investigation, each county had to, or each precinct, in Stewart County, had to send in their results. When I looked at these results that were sent in, it listed this particular gentleman, how many votes they got, this gentleman, there's 3 more, and then Jesse Glasgow got 4 votes. No. And I thought, he ran for office. He was like, let's see, it was just after the Civil War. He was in the Civil War in his 60s. When you read his pension file, there's no way he could run for anything. He had a withered hand, he had dysentery, he couldn't, walk across the room. But he's running for office and got 4 votes. Who knew? Candidate records, poll worker lists. What if your ancestor volunteered to work the polls? Do any of you work the polls now? Well, your name's in election and voting records. So some of those older poll worker lists could survive. Candidate records and voting district changes. We talk about boundary changes when we're doing our research. Think about within a county and the districts. We today still have redistricting. Every so many years, we redistrict. In Houston County, at one point, we had 12 districts. Today, we have 6. Now, if you have ancestors, this is how it works for me. When you have ancestors that didn't own property, they were sharecroppers or they rented. They moved around a lot, seemingly. They moved around a lot. Well, if you find them over here in this district, but then now they're over here in this district, maybe they didn't move, maybe their district moved, they redistricted. So always keep that in mind. And a lot of times you'll find some of that information in the voting and election records, because the assessor of property actually does the redistricting, but they have to keep up with it because of the voting districts. Photographs. I absolutely love photographs because I don't have very many photographs. My husband's family has experienced 3 total house fires in their history. And my parents, my father was in the Air Force, and on their way back from Germany, the military packs you up, moves you back to the States. They got everything but one box. Guess what in the box that was? All of their photographs. They knew I was going to be a genealogist. They did it on purpose. But most all archives have collections of photographs. They either have them digitally these days. A lot of people are donating photographs by scanning them and sending to us by digital. I'm getting photographs. People are sending to me by Facebook Messenger. But I'm grateful to get them in any way, shape, or form because it documents our history. You might find photos of people, places, buildings, schools, churches, or maybe photographs of events that happened in the community. Maybe there was a big flood, or like the tornado that happened in Clarksville, Montgomery County. They did a whole book on that. And so, events. Manuscript collections of vertical files could also include photographs. Court records, like I said, could include photographs. And I'll give you a little bit of an example because I talked about the Tennessee Supreme Court being here at the top floor. The lady that I think I told you, well, I guess I was before we started, she was writing a book about her family. Her ancestor, her grandfather, great-grandfather, was murdered on the streets of Erin in 1921. And the case actually went all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. And she had gotten a copy of the Tennessee Supreme Court case. Inside that court case were pictures of downtown Erin from 1921, because they were taking pictures of the scene. But for an archivist and a local historian, you're just like, oh, wow. Because we had the railroad then. There was the old hotel that's haven't been there since forever, since the 50s. The depot, we have no depots left. And so those are fantastic. I have seen local court cases where you see all kinds of photographs. I have a divorce case where the gentleman who was suing for divorce kept these correspondence from his wife. His wife would send him letters of her on top of this car in the 1950s in a bikini, but she was with her lover. So it was, you know, I don't get all that, but yeah, you don't know what you're going to find in a court case. So, and unidentified photographs. I always encourage genealogists to ask and to look at unidentified photographs. And you may be thinking, why, if I don't know what my ancestors look like? But if you do know what your ancestors look like, if you have a photograph of your ancestor, look at the unidentified photographs. You might find another photograph of them, or you might be able to help the archivist identify someone in a photograph if you have other photographs, you know, because sometimes they're old. We need to save all of our photographs because you just don't know who they're going to belong to, because a lot of them get thrown away, and so we just need to keep them. So those are some of the major records that I consider ones that genealogists don't access as much as they should, that I think will really help you with your genealogy research. But you need to remember that a lot of these records are going to be behind closed doors. Not that you don't have access to them, but it may not come to your mind to think of them when you're at a research facility. And so we need to think about it, and we need to talk to our archivists, our librarians, whoever we're working with. Pick their brains about what they have. Tell them what you're looking for. Don't give them the 3-hour family history speech, but tell them specifically, I'm looking for this, or this is the surnames. And I'll tell you another good reason why that is a good idea to do. Because after you leave the facility, this is what I do. I don't know if all archivists do this. Maybe it's because I'm in a smaller archives. As I am researching or as I am processing records, that surname will come back to me if I see it. And I'll say, wait a minute. And I'll go to our sign-in sheet where I have people put in their surnames, and I'll try to find who was that was in here research, and I'll contact them. And I'll say, we've just run across this record. Is it something you're interested in? And so another important reason to tell the archivist about what you're looking for. These shelves and boxes in the archives, we call them the stacks. That's just a term we use for them. The research area only has a small amount of genealogical records, and most are in back rooms. Talk to the archivist, be specific with your records request, and build a relationship with the archivist and archives, especially if you know you're going to be doing a lot of research there. If your ancestors lived there for a long time, you're going to probably be doing a lot of research with them. So build a rapport with them, build a kind of a relationship with them, and you'll be surprised, you know, the help that you'll get. Let's talk a minute about archives online. I told you I would do a little bit of this. While I believe that a lot of our records are not online, there are some fantastic things online. Archives websites. One thing I tell genealogists to do is to get click happy. I'm not a technically minded person. I know just enough about computers to get me in trouble. And so when he's trying to help me with the problem with the computer, he'll say, stop that, because I get click happy. I'll start clicking on stuff. Well, I give you permission to be click happy on archives websites because some of these websites don't make it very easy for you to find anything. I sometimes wonder it's because there's so much there. But start clicking. Click on everything. I did that, and I have been able to dig deep into their websites and find some things. Use the search feature on their website. Don't use it exclusively. Don't depend on it. Their algorithms may not be set up to find what you're looking for, but use it. It might help you. Use the Ask the Archivist button or Ask the Librarian button. The Tennessee State Library and Archives has just instituted this just a while back. And I've heard some people say that they're real quick to answer. I haven't used it. I've just heard that they're pretty quick to answer. So use that, especially if you can't travel to the area. Email and call these places. I would say about 10 years ago, a lot of our archives were not quite that great at returning phone calls or emails. Because I don't know why, it just seemed like they just didn't. Today, they are much better about it. In fact, they're much better about using social media, email, telephone, because they want your patronage. They want you to use their archives. Use websites that many archives share and contribute information to. Many archives contribute their finding aids, their indexes, and other information to places like Archive Grid. I'll say these slowly because I didn't put them in your handout. It's Archive Grid. Archive Grid is actually from the Library of Congress. Internet Archive. If you go to Internet Archive, be prepared to stay there for a long time. They recently digitized, I can't remember how many thousands of 75 records, the old 75s. So don't get stuck in that. Another place is the National Manuscript Collections. It's NUCMC. We call it NUCMUC. I want to say it's National. Union Catalog. Thank you. Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. National NUM. Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm trying to think how it is. National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. MC, yeah. They're a fantastic place too. An Archive Grid and Internet Archive. A lot of our archives and libraries will put on these websites their finding aids, indexes, and a lot of information they have in their collections. If you go to the Tennessee State Library and Archives, they have a section there where you can look at their index of their manuscript collections, what they have here in this building. So it's fantastic. So let's have a reality check. We're almost done. Statistics say there's only 5 to 10% of all genealogical records online. I personally think that number is closer to that 5%. So then now think about it. If it's 5 to 10%, that means there's 90 to 95% of the records are still sitting on shelves in archives for all of us to discover. So if you can't travel to where you need to travel to, and I have ancestors that are in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, use the internet, use their websites, use email, use the telephone. Contact these repositories and talk to them. That's what I do. I've been able to get a lot of records and a lot of information that way from being right here in Tennessee. And remember, it's not all online. Contact or visit an archive today. And thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too long. A lot of information. But I hope that I've encouraged you to, when you are doing your research, that like me, I do this too. You don't go to the same websites, you don't go to the same repositories, that you think outside the box, what else could be out there? Where are the records? Well, thank you so much for coming today.